Let's bring in Jenna Ellis. She is a brilliant attorney out of Denver, Colorado. She works for the James Dobson Family Institute. She has done criminal cases in her career. So, you know, I'm not much for speculation, but here, somebody's lying. Either Kavanaugh's lying or the accusers are lying, okay? Or two out of the three, but somebody's lying in each case. Let's take the Avenatti situation, because this seems to be the most outrageous of the three. If it's demonstrated that there were not 10 parties, that no one who attended any of those parties remembers anything like a gang rape or spiking of the punch intoxicating women. If that's demonstrated by an investigation, by a recantation, by whatever, what happens to the accuser and Avenatti?
Well, Avenatti has a bar license, and so for him, the consequences would be from the Attorney Regulation Council in the states that he is bar licensed in, and he should be very careful about that. But right now, we're litigating basically on Twitter.
Avenatti could lose his license to practice law. Could he be held in any criminal way?
It depends. It depends because right now we're litigating on Twitter, and the fact that Avenatti has only put this particular allegation out into the context of Twitter. His client is not yet scheduled to testify. They actually haven't filed any sort of police report or complaint. And so the fact that he's just trying to put this out there and call for the derailing of the entire nomination process and the confirmation, then he's really not risking much right now in terms of his client. His client isn't really risking much. Because
bear with me because I'm a simple man. He has obtained a sworn affidavit from his client. All right? He has shown that affidavit in public and sent it to people. Apparently, he sent it to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Apparently, they have it. So it's more than just Twitter. He's got the sworn affidavit, sent it out. No, if it turns out to be bogus, a total fraud, he has no criminal liability?
Well, I don't think so, because we're not in the context of a criminal trial here. And so we have to remember that the Senate confirmation hearing isn't a criminal trial. This is his client swearing under perjury charges. And so he could claim, well, this happened, this came forward, and I simply represented my client. And so we always have a situation in court where one side is telling the truth or the other is not. I mean, we have some situations where perhaps the recollection is a little bit different.
So Avenatti at this point can't be arrested and charged with anything. What about his client? What about the woman?
It depends on what they actually can prove. Because remember, even in the context of a criminal trial, if a defendant is found not guilty by the jury, that doesn't mean that then every victim that comes forward then is filed, there are false reporting charges filed. That's why we have a standard of beyond any and all reasonable doubt, because what the victim can still claim is, well, we just couldn't prove it to that high standard in court. And that's why we have protections for the defense. And so it's a different charge, and that has to be proved beyond any and all reasonable doubt, if there are false reporting charges filed against an alleged victim. And what we don't have right now is a police report or any sort of criminal allegation in that context of Maryland or even a federal crime. So perjury charges potentially.
Yeah, perjury is, the woman signed a sworn affidavit. If any evidence comes forward or enough evidence comes forward to say that she lied in the affidavit, that's a crime, right?
That is, yes. But now, for them to be able to say, we just have this affidavit and the Senate just disregards this, they choose to believe Brett Kavanaugh, they don't think that there's corroboration. Really, Michael Avenatti and these women are not risking much in terms of criminal liability, which I think is highly problematic.
All right. Now, defamation, civil lawsuit. Certainly Mark Judge, okay? Not a public figure, named by this last accuser as someone at these 10 parties, all right, spiking punch and lining up people for gang rape. Certainly Mark Judge could sue the woman for defamation, could he not?
Anyone can sue for anything. So I always tell my students, the question isn't, can you sue? It is, will you prevail? And so in the context of a civil defamation hearing, he would carry the burden of proof, and that's by a preponderance more likely than not. I do think that that is a potential avenue for him to recover and at least try to negotiate a settlement. But whether or not he can show that by a preponderance becomes the question. Can he sue? Yes. Should he? We'll see.
Okay. If he has to pay the lawyer to sue, that'll cost him $1 million and up. So like the accusers, all of whom have lawyers working for free, he would have to get somebody to rep him who would be doing it pro bono or for a piece of the settlement, because I'm sure the man could not afford millions and millions of dollars in legal bills, right?
Right. And what's interesting as well is that you don't see anyone that is Republican or even independent representing any of the claimants against Brett Kavanaugh. I think that's really telling and very fascinating. And so whether or not someone will come forward and represent Mark Judge, if he's interested in that, remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, they have various agencies that purport to represent conservatives who are treated in a dishonest way. However, they're not front and center like the left wing is. Overall,
well, why isn't the ACLU doing this?
I know them, and I don't want to besmirch them now. About a month ago, I talked to the leader of one of these crews, and the man was less than impressive. He was afraid.
But why isn't the ACLU doing this when really they
the ACLU will never do it.
Of the civil rights movement?
They'll never do it.
Because what we're doing now,
No,
of course they won't.
It's a political group, but we all know that. We got to stay in a real world here. We all know the ACLU is in business now to promote progressive causes, period. Once in a while, they'll cherry pick something on a free speech basis to say, see, we're not, but we all know. Now, as an attorney, all right, and someone who teaches the law, and a woman, I find it very difficult as a journalist and a fair person, even though I've gone through this, to say that woman is, and you fill in the blank. I can't do that in good conscience because I don't know what happened. I certainly don't believe there were 10 parties where gang rapes took place because women were inebriated by spiked punch. I don't believe that. That would be like saying, boa constrictors are going to kill 40,000 people in New York City tomorrow. I don't believe it, all right? It just doesn't stack. But I can't say to my audience, these women are fill in the blank. I can't. Can you?
I think the question here is what's reasonable. Anything is possible. To your hypothetical, is it possible that boa constrictors could kill 40,000 people tomorrow in New York City? Sure, that's possible. Is it reasonable for us to believe that and then act on that belief? That's why we have levels of proof, and that's why we have the presumption of innocence in this country. Because to believe their claim is to go against not only fundamental fairness, but reasonableness. And then why they would come forward to say something so unreasonable, that's what the voters in the midterm and women in particular need to think about and determine which of these parties is actually protecting the constitutional rights, the American values that we hold dear and that we believe in. Because nobody's saying fill in the blank, nor should we. But what we should be saying is what here is reasonable and is even more likely than not true. That is the question for me as a woman and as a lawyer.
A poll came out and more Americans believe the accusers than Judge Kavanaugh. It's close. And it's based upon how many people want the judge on the court and how many don't. It's almost the same thing. So, and human beings being predictable, if you don't like Judge Kavanaugh on the court, you're going to believe the accuser. If you want him on the court, you're going to disbelieve the accuser. Human nature, I understand that. But it's a question that I'm not sure at this point in our history that Americans can get outraged about anything. You know, if Judge Kavanaugh is telling the truth, and these people are lying about him to this extent, that is one of the worst things that has ever happened in the United States, ever. And
I agree. And this,
you know, are people outraged about it? Are people, you know, up in 3.5 million people watched Kavanaugh on cable news on Monday. That's all. We have 330 million people in this country with access to television. 3.5 million watched him. That's less than 1%. I'm looking around. I see we're becoming a zombified nation now. Go ahead, last word.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to our culture. Are we more interested in political-based outcomes like the progressive left and how they have consistently had a majority on the Supreme Court that has been more interested in political outcomes than conserving and protecting the rule of law and our fundamental protected freedoms in this country? That's what we're up against. This is so much more of a bigger question than one confirmation hearing. This is, where do we stand and what values do we hold dear as Americans? And for people to think that a person does not deserve the presumption of innocence like Chuck Schumer, that is a dark, dark day in America.
It really is. And the Democratic Party has a lot to explain right now. Jenna, thanks very much. It's always nice to see you, and thanks for taking the time. Now, here's what should happen.
Thank you, Bill. Nice.